I still wonder how we got here. From the wide-open communications promised by the internet to a series of social media gulag archipelagos that talk a good game about freedom, but have all the consistency of the rights written and constantly revised down on the barn wall in Orwell's Animal Farm. And I wonder if it doesn't say something about the core of human nature, of the narcissism and self-absorption, to think that rights and speech are for thee and not for me, and the easy, casual way law can be abused in the service of brute force self-interest. As it affects me, there isn't a lot I can do. Unfair and capricious systems always favor those with a lack of conscience and no restraint on their need to impose their will on others. And just like the Hobbesian state of nature favors those who are most brutal, caprice and unfairness tends to favor, at least temporarily, those unburdened by conscience. The Christianos brothers, those agape-filled Jesus followers, act as if they are the ones without sin, and they have a wheelbarrow full of stones to throw. And I would be very interested to hear, and laugh at, their claim that their Christianity provides them with a superior moral template. And Karen Stolz now thinks her accusatory fundraising video is an original composition. Screwing my ex-boyfriend for fun and profit. Regardless of what kind of soulless, crazy people they are, YouTube is a lazy turd sandwich for aiding and abetting them. Yes, they have. I just received notice on my counter notification. YouTube agrees that Stolz now has every right in the world to mount a years-long campaign of vilification and false accusation against her former lover, profit enormously from it, and then when shown to be a lying sack of shit, reel it all back in because it no longer serves her purpose. The only good thing is that crazy lady there doesn't get my name and address. The bad thing is that even if I take care of the Christianos brothers, YouTube's bomb first and acquire target later rules will still limit me to 15 minutes a shot. And then I have to take a step back because, considering this and recent events, I'm finally going to get to the point where, on my more charitable days, I would think people are such that the only way to fix the problem is to sterilize the fucking planet down to the bedrock with nuclear weapons if necessary. And the only thing that offsets that tendency to drill down into the darkest recesses of a heart more and more stained by happenstance and the casual malice of others is the response I've gotten. Offers of help, offers of solace, and people who just want to talk. One of the better moments I had was from a viewer in Portugal who emailed me with the opening assumption that I would not have time to read, let alone respond to her letter. And so I immediately fired back an email saying, "Yep, I was reading it, and you're going to get a response." Unlike some people, I actually answer my email. When I woke up that drab Sunday morning and faced with YouTube's chipper little account suspension notice and dumbass copyright school, I was of the mind that this was it. This was the end. The only way to go down was fighting with pins from hand grenades in my teeth. That may not be the case, although reality is a bitch and a half. And I've known quite a few bitches and a half. Although mostly, I've known some very nice women who were just not to be. There was Kelly Fahey. Now, I've changed her first name rather than her last because it's too Irish and musical not to keep. This was when I was doing theater on Long Island at university, between my probably cringeworthy high school dramatics and my Arizona theater company days. This is when I was first finding my footing and being cast as Robert Falcon Scott in Ted Talley's Terra Nova, Gus in Pinter's The Dumb Waiter, and Manus in Brian Friel's translations. Terra Nova, which is about Scott, Scott of the Antarctic and his fatally flawed bid for the South Pole, that was a particular challenge because the director, a massively talented son of a bitch, had these ideas that just seemed nuts and then totally worked. And he staged it as a memory play. I was stuck on a lighted circular platform in which characters would enter and leave for the full 2.5-hour duration. I was never off, and it was a marathon of concentration and staying in the scene, even if the focus wasn't on me. What's more, while we were all freezing to death in our ersatz polar costumes, they made us sweat straight down our ass cracks under the hot lights. The good thing that came out of that was that the woman playing Kathleen Scott pursued me. And although labeled a little starfucker, it was a relationship that lasted so long over time and geography that in most jurisdictions we would have been considered common law. And it ended very, very well. But well, unlike my marriage that ended well only because it was like the dissolution of a business partnership. Maybe, just maybe, it should have told me something about Kelly that she backed out of being cast in translations because she didn't want to play a mute. The character, by definition, didn't have enough lines. And the actress who then took the part worked it, owned it, made it greater than the sum of its parts, and totally killed. At the time, the head of this theater department was infatuated with all things Indian and directed a production of Merry Wives of Windsor set in India, in Indian dress, all for no adequately explained reason. He even imported late Indian director and irritating entitled Brahmin Pearl Padamsee, who proceeded to treat everyone like shit, and my only compensation was driving her around during a cold, damp Long Island winter in my unheated 75 Volkswagen and letting her freeze to death. In any case, I'd seen Kelly in other productions, doing medieval miracle plays and such. She was black-haired and blue-eyed and with skin as fair and luminous as alabaster, and I fell for her hard. The catch in my chest, colliding butterflies, and the whole 9 yards. At the time, she was doing traditional Indian theater as the entire department was being transformed into Calcutta on the Hamptons. Dressed in a sari with jingly-jangly, bangly jewelry and doing the totemic hand gestures and stylized eye movements, she was amazing. Fucking beautiful. The rock you come aground on. And so, as a gesture of intent, I wanted to give her a big motherload of roses on her opening night. The only problem with that little plan was I was between jobs at various lumber yards, and my bitching 79 Mazda RX-7 that I just put a rebuilt engine in after my sister, literally the last time she ever drove it, she didn't know what an oil idiot light was and drove it until the engine seized. Within a month of replacing the engine, it was totaled by someone rear-ending me. And I was totally fucking flat broke. What I did have was a glass 5-gallon water cooler full of loose change. And as this was in either the days before coin sorters or my bank didn't have one I could use, I ended up wrapping $50 worth of mostly pennies until my fingertips were green so I could buy Kelly Fahey some roses. And a fat lot of good that did. In any case, I actually wrote out that story to Museum Girl in an email she may or may not have actually read. Although the nature of our relationship wasn't anything like that, and it couldn't be, it was just my way of saying, I try very, very hard. Be nice to me. And a fat lot of good that did. And so finally, at the age of 50, with a divorce and a bunch of no-goes behind me, very attentive and trying too hard me, is on the learning curve. And that includes a nascent relationship with a woman who, despite my warnings, pleadings, and admonitions about the recent devastating effects of text messaging, we went there. As we were in that couple of days honeymoon period of people scoping each other out, she was very attentive and responsive. Far more responsive than Museum Girl ended up being, who could hook and hang me for days. And that's something I'm working on in new content, hamstrung by the 15-minute limit on my videos, thanks to the execrable Stoles Now Cristiano's Brother Evil Clown tag team. And I'm probably going to do what I did here, which is upload it to archive.org rather than be arsed to break it up into 3 parts. I want to do a little explanation of how, especially for men, text messaging is a fucked up tar pit where we stumble in to get stuck and die. Now the hook and hang. You see, that's when communication flags and you are far too obviously okay with that. And then she pops up with the thinking of you text. Usually what makes her think of you is pretty limited, and that's because she filed away a couple of details for later use, like a used car salesman remembering your kids' names to give the illusion of acquaintance. Now, the actual record for this was several months when a woman I briefly dealt with threw me the hook in the form of saying she was watching some survival reality show and thought of me. The problem is, she was so far gone from my thoughts, and I, as I do, deleted her contact. Although I did recognize her from context and style, and didn't bother answering. One of Museum Girl's hooks was that she was watching Golden Girls and thought of me, which might not have been as god-awful a thought if only because she watched Golden Girls at my place. Still, it was a hook. And there was no real conversation, and it ended, as most communication with her did, with a silent, several-day-long hang. She just wanted to remind me she was still out there. Though in later iterations I will refer to her as the Muse, rather than the name some commenter gave her. Somewhere in our sporadic conversation I began referring to her as my muse, which sounds pretentiously needy, but it may turn out that she becomes exactly that, in a way too weird and sad for me to have contemplated. The problem is that I became invested, far too invested than was actually rational for the situation, what it was. Because she was young and pretty and smart and fun and engaging and unlike anyone I'd ever met in my life, and all I wanted to do was be with her, if only in the most casual, standoffish way. And I would have crawled a mile through shit and broken glass to do it. Still, with the hanging texts and the unanswered emails in which I was answering things she had asked me, again, she's just asking me my theoretical kids' names for her future reference, not actually engaging in conversation. And along with everything else that was going on, I was quietly, silently, almost unconsciously collecting grievances that were eventually going to burst to the surface. Eventually, and this is the thing about text messaging, for me the silences, the vacuum between the particles of matter at hand, became filled with my own doubts and silences of past voices. And on the horrible, desperate path of reflection I've been on, I've managed to pull together a couple of insights about her that seems to explain a lot. Although she's now a nurse, she has had some acting experience, as have I. She took part in this really bad film that I ordered on Amazon. Nope. You'll never know what it is, and I will never give out any information through which she can be identified. I don't want to hurt her, and with the exception of being a raging text and email asshole, I'm incapable of it. And the degree to which I've already hurt her, if I can presume a baseline level of importance, has devastated me. I may be an asshole, but I'm not that much of an asshole. And I couldn't be to her because I wouldn't survive it. In any case, a craptastic and pretty fucking pornographic film where the porn doesn't nearly make up for it. The only saving grace was that her scenes were filmed separately, and she had no idea what the fuck the rest of the film was about. Incidentally, Bob Guccione did exactly the same thing to Malcolm McDowell in Caligula. And I've known a lot of actresses and models, and the one thing some need is validation. They need it so much they hoard it. You're never going to get any of theirs. What's more, when she was 18 and looking at college and her nursing degree, she worked as a stripper. No doubt so freshly pretty she must have been amazing and devastating. And I don't mean dancing. Strippers don't make their money showing you their ass. They make it by engaging you, and a good stripper, and I assume she was very, very good, not only gets tons of validation from men, but learn the fine art of handling them and feigning interest. At least that's what I tell myself. And then there was her marriage. And the difference here wasn't just in age, but in experience. That is, I have more. She, at least in outline, had better. From what I gathered of her supposedly abusive and supposedly former husband, he was someone that she spotted and approached in a bar. Ladies' night, I presume, where guys will line up and pay out and wouldn't hope against hope that a pretty doe-eyed blonde woman would beeline for them. And to get her, to have her just sort of drop into his lap, whether or not he was abusive as she said, seems like a crime against karma. But also, think of that from her point of view. She sees a guy, talks to the guy, gets his number, gets a date, gets married, gets exactly what she wants. And I'm sure it wasn't the first time. And I'm sure it's something you get used to. Unlike me, failed penny wrapper that I am. I'm not going to be falling into that tar pit again with shit tests and deal killers and generally being fun of convenience. Nothing is worth revisiting that hell. And after dropping email after email into the abyss, some of them containing the most sincere and abject apologies, alternating with defensive, vulnerable anger, I have to assume that the abyss was all I was dealing with in the first place. And then I stopped myself. I don't want to think that way. I don't want to think of her that way. Because I need her, and I need her to be the way I need her to be. And the mere fact that there's no way I should feel like this shouldn't make a whole lot of difference. If you could turn your conscience off, no one would have one, which would be a first move towards self-negation and extinction. Although if there was an eternal sunshine switch that I could press so that some women were as unimportant to me as I was to them, I would trip it. Maybe. In looking for the good, I realized that in the intervening time since the middle of April when all this went down, which was a couple of days after my birthday, and maybe that had something to do with it, without exercise and lacking diet, I have pretty much shed the totality of my winter seasonal affective disorder weight. But there's always more to consider. A new girl, and let's call her Vicky because it's close enough, wanted me to talk to someone. Now, I am in no way making some sort of Melody Hensley PTSD comparison here, but I know a guy, a really, really nice fucking guy, who started to tell me about his 2 tours in Vietnam in Special Forces. And this isn't some beard-up asshole in a bar, he's completely legit. And I don't know why, but people think they can confide in me, and they're right. He told me about some of the shit that went down over there, his eyes misting over, and told me that when he came back, he could only talk to the dog. And I feel like that, but I don't have a dog. She died in '97, and all I have is her ashes and memories. And just to share some further autobiographical weirdness, I had a friend from Arizona who married a guy and moved to Memphis. She told me her father died in Vietnam, and so, now that I was in D.C., could I find his name on the wall? And so I go there, and I can't find it. They have a pretty precise way of finding people by name and date that leads to a specific coded section. He's just not there. I call her, and I confirm his full legal name, the date, that he died in Cambodia. Nothing. He is simply not there. And so she talks to her mother, and well, I always thought her mother was a little bit off. But how about this for a soap opera twist? Her biological father, the one she thought was dead most of her life, wasn't dead. He was just disaffected. He came back from Nam and immediately fucked off. And so my friend didn't transfer any affection from her stepfather, who was a hell of a guy. Her mother told her her natural father was dead. Anyway, right now I kind of know how they feel. Even her mother. A fucked up world requires solutions, regardless of how fucked up those may be. My least fucked up solution is to plow through all this shit, dig up memories, examine them, and put them back into some sort of order. And if I manage that, it will be with a big heaping dose of the sort of autobiographic detail that sometimes worked its way into my videos that some people like. It's a process, and sometimes process is good, even if only because it gives you something to do. And maybe I'm so desperate to be understood, and this is probably never coming, that all I can do is wrap all this up like a message in a bottle and hope it washes up on shore. Although then this happened. Vicky and I, texting back and forth while I was writing this, well, we hit a bit of an impasse. And on reflection, the problem here is clearly not her or text. It's me. And here I was slightly tempted to throw up a few screen caps so you can see how this works. But even if I prune and pixelate, it's dangerously close to a breach of trust, and I don't want to do that. But the difference is she's actually responsive. Let me put it this way, like a pretentious guy with a degree in philosophy tends to do. The logical positivist J.L. Austin, and this is in Sense and Sensibilia if you want to look it up, was addressing the so-called sense perception theorists and their objection to the verification principle on which logical positivism and empiricism is based. You see, even if sense perception paints an imperfect and symbolic view of reality, and think here of the difference between a model of the DNA molecule and what it actually is, you'd have to assume your model of reality is pretty good or you'd get run over crossing the street. And of course, even sense perception theorists look both ways before crossing. However, they argued by analogy that perceptual illusions, such as a stick halfway out of water looking bent due to the refraction of light, meant we should toss out senses as a form of knowledge, which, I don't know, would leave nothing but tautologies. The mark of a great thinker isn't necessarily that they think great thoughts. Rather, they say something that's common sense that should be blindingly obvious were we not mired in the problem. Austin argued that the cure for possibly erroneous sense perception was more sense perception. That is, you walk up, pull the stick from the water, and see the stick is not actually bent. That's how you know reality, and that's how you know the principle of optics that light bends as it passes through media with different refractive indexes. And so because Vicky is actually communicating, it's possible to correct errors of misapprehension rather than their hanging and festering for days. And then, even worse, have someone act like they're doing you a favor by accepting your effort and best intentions. And so, as much as I like the idea of her, It may well be that the muse wasn't good for me at all, and even within our limited interaction was just a sweet confection with little caloric value that I would have been malnourished by. And so what to do? Sometimes when you have fought as long and hard as I have, you have to stop and reaffirm exactly why it is you're fighting and what it is you're fighting. Especially when fighting has become an almost autonomic reflex that starts deploying in the most inappropriate and tragic ways. And so here's the fight I can do. I've had more than a couple people comment or email me wanting to make sure I saved a favorite video of theirs. And I started emailing them, or rather, due to the file sizes, linking on Google Drive. Let's expedite that process. In the description bar, and if this ends up on archive.org, it will be back on YouTube and here. In that description bar is a Google Drive link to a zip file of what is, with a couple unimportant exceptions, my entire catalog. An entire catalog that, thanks to some great guys that have freed me up to do this, will be uploaded to the Library of Congress and then to foreign servers. And if they can't, I will. You want to mirror them, excerpt them, use them to make your own content, or just listen to them while you clean your oven, they are yours. I have and always will treat my stuff under Creative Commons, unlike some people. That's just so my old content, the shit you like, isn't dropped into the abyss. What will happen next is a bit of a departure, something of a lateral move that might in the end make all this stupid, tragic, bullshit drama worth some of the pain it has caused. At least, I have to believe so.